My neighbor just had a baby, and her husband died shortly after. She always had watery, reddish eyes. She would sit at her doorstep holding her baby, complaining that her pipes were broken and that she was completely soaked. All the married men in the building would go into her apartment to help her for free. If any of their wives complained even a little, the men would scowl. She lost her husband at such a young age. What's wrong with helping her? Can't you show some compassion? With this exact trick, she managed to get 3 neighboring couples divorced. Last month, Ethan and I moved in. On our very first night, she knocked on our door. Wearing a loose robe, with red, teary eyes, she looked at my husband, looking absolutely pitiful. "Mr. Vance, the baby won't stop crying, and my breast milk is severely clogged. It hurts so bad. Can you please help me look at it?" Ethan didn't say a word. He just turned to look at me. I stood up from the couch, picked up my professional lactation massage kit, and walked over with a sweet smile. A clogged duct. What a coincidence. I happen to be a certified lactation consultant, and I absolutely love cleaning out clogged trash.
1.
I slipped on my slippers, walked right past Ethan, and stood in front of Chloe Sterling. The motion sensor light in the hallway was on, clearly illuminating her silk slip nightgown. The fabric was incredibly thin, and the neckline dipped extremely low. As a draft blew through the hallway, she intentionally shivered, leaning weakly against the doorframe. "Mrs. Vance, you're still awake too." She managed to squeeze out a weak smile, but her eyes kept drifting past my shoulder, staring straight at Ethan. "Actually, I was just about to sleep, but you woke me up." I shook the lactation kit in my hand, making a crisp clinking sound. "Let's go. Didn't you need help with a clogged duct? Lead the way." Chloe clearly didn't expect me to step in myself. She froze, awkwardly crossing her hands over her chest. "Oh, I don't want to trouble you, Mrs. Vance. This kind of thing is pretty awkward, and it might make another woman uncomfortable. Mr. Vance is strong and quick. He can probably get it resolved in no time. You think it's appropriate for a man to massage your breasts?" I pushed her apartment door wide open and walked straight inside, without hesitation. It's much better for a woman like me to handle it. Chloe's apartment layout was identical to ours, but the interior style was completely different. The living room was filled with a strong, cloying perfume. A few pieces of lace lingerie were scattered on the couch, and 2 wine glasses sat on the coffee table. This didn't look like the home of a struggling single mother who just had a baby. It looked like a love motel ready to welcome guests at any moment. "Where are we doing this?" I turned and asked her. Chloe dragged her feet as she walked in, pointing toward the bedroom. Her voice was barely a whisper. "It was hurting so badly just now, but I don't know what happened. It feels a bit better now." I walked up to her and zipped open my kit. My professional massage hands went to work immediately. I prepped the tools for a solid 30 seconds, letting the scent of the essential oil fill the air. "Mrs. Vance, your hands are too heavy. My son is sleeping in the bedroom." Chloe covered her chest, took 2 steps back, a flash of annoyance in her eyes. "Just being thorough," I said, putting my kit heavily back on the coffee table. I turned to look at her. "Otherwise, if it gets clogged again in the middle of the night, you'll have to go knocking on someone else's door." Chloe's expression shifted. She took a deep breath, putting on that tragic, helpless face again. "Mrs. Vance, is there some kind of misunderstanding between us? I really couldn't handle it myself. It's the middle of the night, and I don't have a man to rely on." "If you don't have a man, you can hire a cleaning service, call the building manager, or call 911 if it's a real emergency." I cut her off, my eyes falling on the high-heeled, furry slippers on her feet. "But Chloe, it's past 11 p.m. Knocking on a married neighbor's door in that outfit while holding a baby, that's not a very good habit. You." Before she could argue, I walked right past her toward the front door. Halfway there, I stopped, pointing at a pair of size 10 men's leather shoes sitting by her shoe rack. "You bought the wrong size," I said without turning back. "Ethan wears a size 9. If you've got your eyes on my husband, you should at least get his shoe size right." The moment I slammed her door shut, I could clearly hear the sharp sound of her high-heeled slippers violently stomping the floor inside. When I got back home, Ethan was sitting on the couch researching some documents. Seeing me walk in, he immediately handed me a glass of warm water. "Handled?" he asked. "Just a home-wrecking bitch trying her luck," I said, taking a sip. "Watch your step when you leave for work. Don't let her get close to you." Ethan sneered, sliding his tablet over to me. "No need to wait for later. She's already starting her drama right now." I looked down. It was the neighborhood's Snapchat group. Just a minute ago, Chloe had posted a message. 02. The message in the Snapchat group was dripping with victimhood. "Thank you to the new neighbor, Mrs. Vance, for coming over in the middle of the night to help me. Even though her massage was a bit too rough and my chest is still hurting, I'm really grateful. I think Mrs. Vance might have misunderstood me, though. She said some really hurtful things. It's just so hard raising a baby alone. If I wasn't desperate, I would never bother anyone. I'm so sorry for disturbing everyone's rest. Less than 30 seconds after she posted this, those lurking married men in the neighborhood jumped out like sharks smelling blood. Apartment 302, Marcus. Chloe, don't take it to heart. Young people these days are just hot-headed and lack empathy. Apartment 501, Brad. Exactly. We're all neighbors. What's wrong with helping out? She's a single mother in pain. How could someone say such nasty things just because she knocked on a door? Apartment 604, Kevin. Chloe, next time you need help, just shout in the group. We'll come over. You don't need to take attitude from certain people. Looking at this row of righteous comments, I was practically laughing from anger. They were basically calling me cold-hearted to my face. Ethan grabbed his phone, his fingers flying across the screen, ready to fire back. But I pressed my hand over his. Don't waste your breath. Arguing in the group chat is exactly what she wants. It'll only make her look more like the victim. Just wait. Tomorrow, I'll make her dig her own grave. The next day was the weekend. I got up early, changed into my workout gear, and went downstairs to jog in the community garden. As I approached the gazebo, I saw Chloe sitting on a bench. Today, she had changed into a floral sundress, her long hair draped over her shoulders. She was gently dabbing her eyes with a tissue. A few older women and two middle-aged men were gathered around her, talking heatedly with indignant expressions. I slowed my pace and walked over. Morning, everyone. I greeted them with a smile, sitting down in an empty spot nearby. The air instantly went dead silent. The men who had been talking loudly a second ago immediately averted their gaze, pretending to look at the sky and the trees. Chloe shrunk back slightly, acting terrified. Morning, Mrs. Vance. Morning, Chloe. I wiped my sweat, keeping my tone casual. Is your chest feeling any better? I actually double-checked, and the technique I used is completely safe for nursing mothers. If it's still hurting, you might want to see a doctor. It could be mastitis. Chloe's expression stiffened. It's fine. It felt much better when I woke up this morning. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Vance. Of course, I nodded, then turned to Marcus from apartment 302, who had been the loudest critic online. Marcus, I heard you're always looking out for Chloe. Since she was in so much pain last night, why didn't she knock on your door instead? Marcus's wife happened to be walking back from grocery shopping nearby. Hearing this, her face instantly darkened. Marcus stammered, I was asleep. Oh, I see, I said, pretending to realize something. By the way, last night, I noticed a pair of size 10 men's shoes in Chloe's entryway. Did you lend them to her, Marcus? Well, it makes sense. A single mother needs a pair of men's shoes by the door to keep intruders away. The moment I said this, the eyes of several women nearby turned incredibly sharp. Chloe panicked and stood up abruptly. Mrs. Vance, watch your mouth. Those shoes belong to my late husband. I couldn't bear to throw them away, so I kept them as a keepsake. Is there a problem with that? Of course not. I pulled my phone from my pocket and pulled up a photo. I had taken it on my way into her apartment last night. I zoomed in on the photo and thrust it right in front of her face. But I heard your husband died in a car accident a year ago. This pair of Ferragamo men's loafers is from their brand new fall collection released just last month. And they happen to match the women's slippers you're wearing today. Buying both pairs together costs over $1,200. I watched her face turn completely pale as I said, word by word. Wow, Chloe, you and your late husband must have a love that transcends death. He's been gone for a year, yet you're still buying matching couple shoes with him? 03. There was a deathly silence. Everyone's eyes locked onto my phone screen, and then they all slowly turned to look at Chloe's feet. Chloe's face went completely white. She tried to hide her feet, but there was nowhere to tuck them. The identical buckles. Without a doubt, they were matching couples' shoes. The men who had just been defending Chloe now looked incredibly uncomfortable. In particular, Brad from apartment 501 subconsciously tucked his feet backward. How convenient. Brad happened to wear a size 10. Brad's wife, Tiffany, who is notorious for her explosive temper, slammed her grocery bag onto the ground. She pointed right at Brad's nose and screamed, Brad, you took $1,200 out of our joint account last month and said it was for your mother's medicine. You spent it on shoes for this bitch. Honey, let me explain. I didn't buy those shoes. Brad sweated profusely, trying to defend himself. If you didn't buy them, why are you hiding your feet? Matching shoes? I didn't know you had such a romantic streak. Tiffany didn't give him a second to breathe. She lunged forward and slapped him across the face. The scene immediately descended into chaos. Chloe was completely caught off guard by this sudden turn of events. She tried to grab Tiffany's hand. "Tiffany, please don't misunderstand. It really wasn't Brad. Get away from me. You husband-stealing whore." Tiffany shoved her hard. Chloe fell onto the grass, clutching her ankle. Her eyes welled up, and fat tears started rolling down her cheeks. Before, this pitiful act would have had men rushing to help her up. But now, under the murderous glares of their own wives, not a single man dared to move. I watched the drama unfold coldly, said nothing more, and turned around to continue my jog. For the next few days, the building was exceptionally quiet. Chloe didn't post a single thing in the group chat, and the male neighbors went completely silent. Every night, the sound of breaking plates echoed from Brad's apartment. Marcus's wife simply packed up, took the kids, and went to stay at her parents' house out of state, showing no signs of coming back anytime soon. But I knew Chloe wouldn't just take this lying down. A woman like her, who was used to wrapping men around her finger, couldn't stand losing her reputation. What she hated most was losing control of the narrative. She was waiting for an opportunity to completely flip the script and crush me. On Wednesday night, Ethan was in the study hosting a video conference, while I was in the living room organizing a PR proposal for a client. Suddenly, a frantic knocking came from the door, accompanied by the crying voice of Chloe's 5-year-old son, Leo. "Ethan, open the door. My mommy collapsed. Please help her." I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. In the hallway, Leo was wearing thin pajamas, pounding on our door. Meanwhile, Chloe was lying on the floor a few feet away near the elevator, her face pale and her eyes tightly closed. Under normal circumstances, seeing a 5-year-old child crying like this would make anyone open the door immediately. But I didn't budge. Because I clearly saw that Chloe, who was supposedly unconscious on the floor, was clutching her phone tightly in her right hand, and the screen was still lit. Moreover, the spot she chose to collapse was highly strategic. It perfectly avoided the blind spot of the hallway's security camera. Most importantly, although Leo was crying, his eyes kept darting back to Chloe, as if waiting for a cue. She was putting on a tragic show, and she was using her own kid to do it. "What's going on out there?" Ethan heard the noise and came out of the study. I put my index finger to my lips, signaling him to be quiet, and then pointed at the peephole. Ethan took a look, his brows furrowing instantly. He pulled out his phone, preparing to call 911. "Don't call yet." I stopped him. "If you call 911 now, by the time the ambulance arrives, everyone in the building will think you ignored a dying neighbor at your doorstep. Then what do we do? Just let her lie out there?" Ethan whispered. I smirked, looking at the hidden pinhole camera we had installed right above our peephole. "Since she loves acting so much, let's give her a bigger stage." 04. The crying and screaming outside grew louder, and Leo's voice was getting hoarse. The commotion finally drew out the other residents on our floor. Mrs. Gable, the busybody from across the hall, was the first to open her door. Seeing the scene, she gasped and rushed over to hug Leo. "Oh my God, what a tragedy. Chloe, wake up." Mrs. Gable patted Chloe's face, then turned to slam her hand against our door, screaming, "Are the people inside dead? Can't you hear the child crying? Get out here and help." With Mrs. Gable screaming, neighbors from upstairs and downstairs started poking their heads out. Soon, a crowd gathered in front of our door. Most of them were nosy seniors, but a few of the male neighbors rushed over too. Looking at our tightly shut door, the crowd grew furious. "What is wrong with the new family? They are so heartless." Exactly. It's one thing for her to be sharp-tongued normally, but this is a life-or-death situation, and they won't even open the door. "Ethan, be a man and get out here. Hiding inside makes you a coward." Someone in the crowd yelled, and immediately after, our door was kicked hard twice. Under the crowd's shouting, Chloe finally woke up. She leaned weakly against Mrs. Gable, panting heavily, tears streaming down her face. Don't blame Ethan. It's just my own poor health." She spoke with a barely audible voice, but her eyes were fixed on our door. "I just heard that Ethan's mother is a doctor, so I figured Ethan might know first aid. That's why I had Leo knock. Maybe they aren't home." This was textbook manipulation. She managed to explain why she only knocked on our door, gave us an excuse to save face, and painted herself as a sweet, understanding victim. As expected, the crowd's anger boiled over. "Not home? Bullshit. I was just walking downstairs. Their apartment has the brightest lights in the whole building. Break the door down. I want to see how they can look us in the eye." Several agitated men began looking around for tools, looking ready to smash their way in. Ethan stood beside me, his face grim. He clenched his fists and said coldly, This is getting out of hand. If they break the door, we'll look guilty. Let me go out and set them straight. If you go out, you fall right into her trap. I held him back, my eyes cold. Chloe wanted us to open the door. The moment we stepped out, no matter what we said, the angry mob would see it as a heartless excuse. The banging on our door grew louder, and the metal frame groaned under the pressure. Leo's crying and the neighbors' cursing woven together like a suffocating net, tightening around our space. "Let's call the police," Ethan said, his phone in hand. "No need," I sneered as I looked at the footage on my phone, watching Chloe's pale but secretly smug face. I opened my Snapchat, found the chat with the property manager, Manager Carter, and sent him the video captured by our pinhole camera, along with several documents I had spent all of yesterday digging up. "Let them smash it." I pulled Ethan to sit back down on the couch, calmly pouring 2 glasses of water. "Just 3 more minutes. The real climax of this show is about to begin." The heavy metal frame of our door groaned under the impact of another violent kick. "Outside, Mrs. Gable's voice had reached a shrill, hysterical pitch, vibrating through the thin drywall of the hallway. "Ethan, Mrs. Vance, open this door right now. There is a child crying his eyes out and a mother half dead on the floor. Have you no soul?" Through the pinhole camera feed on my phone, I watched Mrs. Gable dramatically throw her hands in the air, gathering a small crowd of onlookers who had emerged from the elevator. The hallway was quickly filling with the building's self-righteous elite. There was Kevin from 604, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, shaking his head in theatrical disappointment. A couple of elderly ladies from the 4th floor were whispering to each other, their faces twisted in disgust as they stared at our door. And then there was Chloe. She lay curled on the cold hallway tile, her head resting awkwardly against the base of the elevator door. Her silk robe was strategically parted just enough to expose a pale leg, and her breathing was shallow, mimicking a state of profound shock. But my eyes weren't on her legs or her pale face. I was looking at her right hand. It was tucked slightly beneath her hip, but the screen of her iPhone was glowing. From our camera's high-angle view, I could see what she was doing. Her thumb was subtly scrolling. She was refreshing the Snapchat group, monitoring the live reactions of the neighbors who were currently standing just 3 feet away from her. Beset by unconsciousness, she still managed to keep her social media feed updated. Beside her, little Leo was performing admirably. He was sobbing, his small fists red from pounding on our door, but every 10 seconds, his eyes would dart down to his mother's face. Chloe would give a microscopic nod, and Leo would immediately scream louder. "My mommy. Please, someone help my mommy." "This is sickening," Ethan muttered, his voice low and tight. He stood by the entryway, his phone gripped so hard his knuckles were white. "She's using her own kid as a battering ram. Let me go out there and show them the feed. I'll end this right now." "No," I said, placing a hand on his forearm. My voice was calm, almost soothing. "If you open that door now, the narrative is still in her hands." To the crowd, "You're just a defensive husband trying to justify why you ignored a crying child. They won't look at the tablet. They'll just see you arguing with a hysterical Mrs. Gable. We wait." "Wait for what?" "For the property manager. And for the guest I invited." Right on cue, the elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged. The crowd shifted, parting to reveal Manager Carter, the head of the building's Homeowners Association. He was a portly, middle-aged man who usually tried to avoid conflict at all costs, but tonight, his face was flushed. Beside him were 2 building security guards and a tall, thin man wearing a sharp gray suit. "What is going on here?" Carter demanded, his voice echoing in the concrete hallway. "I received a high-priority complaint about a disturbance on the 7th floor." "Carter, thank goodness you're here." Mrs. Gable lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "The Vances have locked themselves inside." Chloe collapsed right at their doorstep, and they're refusing to help. They're letting this poor, grieving widow die in the hallway. Chloe let out a soft, pathetic groan, her eyelids fluttering as if she were trying to wake up from a deep, painful coma. "Mrs. Gable, please don't," she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. "It's not their fault. They must be asleep. I felt so dizzy." "Asleep? With the lights on?" Kevin from 604 sneered. "They're inside, Carter. They're just heartless bastards. We need to kick this door down." The man in the gray suit stepped forward, bypassing Mrs. Gable. He looked down at Chloe, then at our door, and finally turned his attention to Manager Carter. He pulled a badge from his breast pocket. My name is Arthur Ross, the man said, his voice carrying a dry, clinical authority that immediately silenced the crowd. I am a senior investigator with Apex Mutual Life Insurance. And I believe the woman on the floor has some explaining to do. I smiled, unlocking our front door with a soft, distinct click. Step back, everyone, I said, swinging the door wide open. The show is about to start. The sudden opening of the door caught everyone off guard. Mrs. Gable raised her hand, ready to unleash a torrent of abuse, but the sight of my calm, collected expression stopped her mid-breath. I was wearing a clean silk pajama set, my hair neatly tied back, holding a steaming mug of chamomile tea. Behind me, Ethan stood like a stone wall, his arms crossed over his chest. Mrs. Vance. Mrs. Gable sputtered, her face turning an ugly shade of plum. How dare you show your face? Do you have any idea what you've done? This poor girl. This poor girl, I interrupted, my voice clear and carrying down the hallway, has excellent core strength for someone who just fainted. What? Kevin frowned. I didn't answer him. Instead, I tapped the screen of the tablet I was holding in my left hand. I had cast the live feed from our pinhole camera directly to the building's smart display in the lobby downstairs, but I also sent a direct link to the neighborhood Snapchat group, the very group Chloe had been using to destroy my reputation. Everyone check your phones, I said sweetly. I just posted a short film. I call it the birth of a tragedy. A chorus of notification pings echoed through the hallway. One by one, the neighbors pulled out their devices. Mrs. Gable frowned, her fingers fumbling with her screen. Even Chloe's eyes flickered, her hand beneath her hip twitching, as she desperately wanted to check her own phone. The video was clear, high definition, and had perfect night vision contrast. It started 3 minutes before the knocking began. The camera showed the empty hallway. Then, Chloe's door opened. She stepped out, fully dressed in a loose robe carrying a small plastic bottle. She stood under the motion sensor light, opened the bottle, and carefully squeezed 2 drops of liquid into each eye. She blinked rapidly, letting the artificial tears spill over her cheeks, creating the perfect red, watery eyes look. Then, she turned back to her apartment and pulled her 5-year-old son, Leo, into the hallway. The audio was crisp. Remember what we practiced, Leo? Chloe's voice whispered from the tablet speakers. You knock on Mr. Vance's door. You scream that Mommy collapsed. You don't stop until they open it. If you do it right, Mommy will buy you that Lego set tomorrow. Got it? The little boy nodded, looking terrified but eager to please. Got it, Mommy. The video then showed Chloe walking over to the elevator, checking her reflection in the polished metal doors, adjusting the neckline of her robe to expose more skin, and then gracefully laying down on the floor. She checked her phone one last time, tucked it under her hip, and closed her eyes. Go, she whispered to Leo. The video ended with Leo running to our door and screaming. The silence in the hallway was so absolute you could hear the hum of the elevator motor. Mrs. Gable stared at her phone, her mouth hanging open so wide-eyed thought her jaw might drop off. Kevin from 604 slowly lowered his device, his face a mixture of embarrassment and disgust. Chloe lay frozen on the floor. The pale, tragic expression on her face had vanished, replaced by a rigid, icy panic. Leo, I said softly, crouching down to the little boy's level. He was still standing near Mrs. Gable, looking confused by the sudden change in the adult's energy. Did your mommy promise you a Lego set to cry at my door? Leo looked at his mother, then at me, and nodded slowly. The big Star Wars one, he whispered. You monster. Mrs. Gable finally found her voice, but this time, her finger wasn't pointing at me. It was pointing directly at Chloe. You used your own child? You staged this whole thing just to frame the Vances. Chloe scrambled to her feet, her collapse entirely forgotten. She smoothed down her robe, her eyes darting around the hallway like a trapped animal. The watery, tragic look was gone, replaced by a sharp, venomous glare. So what? Chloe hissed, her voice losing all of its soft, breathless quality. I wanted to see if my neighbors had any actual compassion. It was a test. And clearly, the Vances failed. They didn't know it was staged when they kept that door locked. They still let a child scream for help. Actually, Chloe, we knew the entire time, I said, taking a sip of my tea. Because unlike the other men in this building, my husband doesn't keep his eyes glued to your chest. He keeps them on our security feed. But that's not the only thing we knew. I continued, stepping fully into the
hallway.
Chloe tried to take a step back toward her apartment, but Arthur Ross, the insurance investigator, stepped in her path. He wasn't smiling. He had a thick leather folder tucked under his arm, and his eyes were cold as flint. "Let's talk about your baby, Chloe," I said, my tone conversational. "The one you had just recently. The one that caused your severely clogged breast milk last week." Chloe's face went from pale to a sickly, translucent white. "What about my baby? He's sleeping inside." "I'm a single mother, I am a certified lactation consultant, Chloe," I interrupted. "It's my job to understand the postpartum body. When you knocked on my door last week, begging my husband to look at your clogged duct, you made a very amateur mistake." I stepped closer to her, my eyes locking onto hers. When a woman is actively lactating, especially to the point of a severe clog that is causing her excruciating pain, there are very specific physiological signs. There is localized swelling, a change in skin temperature, and the breasts are visibly engorged. But when I put my hands on you last week,
I
smiled, a cold, sharp expression. Your skin was cool. There was no swelling. And your breasts were completely soft. You weren't lactating, Chloe. You haven't lactated in years. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Mrs. Gable's eyes were practically bulging. "That's a lie," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking. "You barely touched me. You don't know what you're talking about."
Ugh, Ida.
"But I didn't rely on just my professional hands," I said. "I also rely on the building's trash chutes. You see, as a new mother who is supposedly breastfeeding a newborn, your trash should be filled with very specific items. Nursing pads, lanolin cream tubes, diapers, formula tins if you're supplementing. But do you know what I found when I checked the 7th floor? Trash disposal logs after you threw your bags away." I pulled up a document on my tablet. Nothing but empty bottles of tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in red eye relief drops, and empty boxes of high-end designer cosmetics. Not a single
diaper.
Not a single baby wipe. And certainly no baby formula. "Where's the baby, Chloe?" Ethan asked, stepping forward beside me. "The baby we hear crying through the walls every afternoon." Chloe clenched her fists, her chest heaving. "He's my son. He's in his crib." "Is he?" Arthur Ross finally spoke up, opening his leather folder. "Because, according to the state vital statistics and the medical records we pulled, Chloe Sterling has only one registered child, Leo Sterling, age 5. There is no record of a second birth. There is no birth certificate, no pediatric registration, and no insurance claim for prenatal care. He was born at home," Chloe shouted, her voice growing increasingly desperate. "I didn't register him yet. A home birth with no midwife, no doula, and no medical follow-up?" I shook my head. "In a building with 20 security cameras that never saw a single medical professional visit your apartment? Try again, Chloe. The crying baby we hear through the wall is a white noise machine set to a loop of a newborn
crying.
You bought it on Amazon 2 months ago using a credit card under the name Chloe Vance." I paused, letting that name sink in. "You were already planning to use my husband's name before we even moved in," I
said softly.
"You saw the lease agreement on the manager's desk last month,
didn't you?
You knew a young, successful couple was moving in and you wanted to add Ethan to your collection of broken marriages." "You're crazy," Chloe spat, but she was trembling now. "You're making all of this up. Carter, tell them to get out of my face. This is harassment." Manager Carter didn't look at her. He was staring at the floor, his face red with shame.
"I'm sorry, Chloe.
"But Mrs. Vance sent me these documents hours ago. I've already authorized a review of your tenancy." "But the tenancy is the least of her problems," Arthur Ross said, pulling a pair of official-looking documents from his folder. "Mrs. Sterling, I am here, representing Apex Mutual. 1 year ago, your husband, Sean Sterling, allegedly died in a fiery single-vehicle car accident in upstate New York. The vehicle was incinerated, and the dental records used to identify the remains were highly questionable. You collected a $2 million life insurance payout 3 months later." The hallway went dead silent again. "What does that have to do with anything?" Chloe stammered, her voice dropping to a whisper.
"He's dead."
"I'm a widow." "He's not dead," I said, my voice cutting through her panic like a knife.
"And
he's currently wearing a size 10 shoe." The mention of the shoe size seemed to shatter whatever resolve Chloe had left. She stumbled back, her hand reaching for her apartment doorknob, but one of the Security guards stepped in, blocking her hand. A year ago, Sean Sterling died. I explained to the crowd, who were now listening with rapt, terrified attention. But a month ago, a pair of brand new fall collection Ferragamo men's loafers was purchased at the boutique downtown. The card used was Chloe's. The store's security footage shows a tall man, approximately 6'1", with a distinct scar on his left temple, picking up the order. He signed the receipt as Sean Sterling. He probably just looked like him,
Chloe cried.
It was a relative. We ran the signature through a forensic examiner, Arthur Ross said calmly.
It
is a perfect match to the signatures on Sean Sterling's life insurance application. Furthermore, we tracked the IP address used to log into Sean Sterling's offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. Every single login for the past 6 months has come from the Wi-Fi network in apartment 702. Your apartment, Chloe. You spied on me. It's called an insurance fraud investigation, Mrs. Sterling, Ross said. And it's entirely legal when there is reasonable suspicion of a $2 million heist. We've been watching this building for 3 weeks. We just needed to confirm he was actively residing inside the unit to execute the warrant. He's not here, Chloe yelled, her eyes wild. He's not in there. I'm alone. Then you won't mind if we take a look, a new voice called out. The elevator dinged again, and 3 plainclothes police officers stepped out, led by a female detective with a badge clipped to her belt. She held up a folded piece of paper. Chloe Sterling? I'm Detective Miller with the NYPD Financial Crimes Task Force. We have a search warrant for apartment 702 and an arrest warrant for Sean Sterling for grand larceny and insurance fraud. Chloe collapsed, this time for real, sinking to her knees on the hallway carpet. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with genuine, hysterical
sobs.
There were no eye drops this time, no strategic parting of her robe.
She
was just a cornered criminal who realized her gilded cage had finally locked shut. Mrs. Gable, I said, turning to the older woman who was still frozen in shock. Would you mind taking Leo to your apartment for a few minutes? He shouldn't have to see this. Mrs. Gable looked at me, her eyes filled with a sudden, overwhelming shame.
She
nodded dumbly, tears welling in her own eyes. Yes. Of course. Come here, sweetheart. She took Leo's hand, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry, Mrs.
Vance.
I was so blind, we all were. Just take care of the boy, I said softly. As Mrs. Gable led Leo away, Detective Miller nodded to the security guards. They stepped forward, took Chloe by the arms, and pulled her to her feet. Key, Detective Miller demanded, holding out her hand to Chloe. Chloe didn't move. She just stared at the floor, her teeth chattering. Ethan stepped forward, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out the spare key card to Chloe's apartment. Manager Carter gave us this earlier to facilitate the investigation, he said, handing it to the detective. Thank you, Mr. Vance, Detective Miller said. She swiped the card. The lock clicked, and the door to apartment 702 swung open. The scent of the cloying, heavy perfume hit us immediately, drifting out into the sterile hallway air. But underneath the sweet, artificial musk there was another smell, the distinct, stale odor of a man who had spent too many months hiding in a confined space. The 3 police officers drew their weapons, moving into the apartment with practiced, silent efficiency. Arthur Ross and I stood at the threshold, while Ethan kept his arm firmly around my waist. NYPD, show your hands. Detective Miller's voice boomed from the interior of the apartment. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of rustling papers and closet doors being flung open. I watched the living room from the doorway. The 2 wine glasses were still on the coffee table, just as they had been the night I went in to massage her. The lace lingerie was gone, but the atmosphere of the room felt heavy, suffocating. Clear in the kitchen, an officer called out. Clear in the bathroom. Bedroom is clear. My brows furrowed. I looked at the security feed on my phone again. He hasn't left the building, I murmured to Arthur Ross. Our pinhole camera has a view of the only fire exit on this floor, and the window fire escapes have sensors. If he tried to climb down, the alarm would have gone off. Is there a hidden crawl space? Ethan asked, looking at Manager Carter. No, Carter esta mered, suetino profuseli. These apartments are standard concrete slabs. There are no crawl spaces or double walls. I stepped into the apartment, bypassing the warning hand of a security guard. I walked straight toward the bedroom. The bedroom was decorated in heavy velvet drapes and dark, expensive wallpaper. A massive king-sized bed sat in the center, its silk sheets tossed in disarray. I stood in the middle of the room, closing my eyes, tuning out the noise of the police officers tapping on the walls. Where would a man hide in an identical layout to my own apartment? I opened my eyes and looked at the walk-in closet. It was a spacious closet, filled with Chloe's designer dresses and rows of expensive shoes. The officers had already cleared it, throwing several garments onto the floor in their haste. "Nothing in here, detective," one officer said, walking out of the closet.
Just
"A bunch of expensive clothes. He must have slipped out before we arrived." "He didn't," I said, walking into the closet myself. "Mrs. Vance, please stay back," Detective Miller warned, but I ignored her. I walked to the back of the closet, where a massive, floor-to-ceiling mirror was bolted to the wall. In my own apartment, this was where the structural column for the building's main plumbing stack was located. But in Chloe's apartment, the column felt slightly off-center. I reached out and touched the frame of the mirror. It was cool, but as I ran my fingers along the gilded edges, I felt a slight, oily residue. Lanolin oil, the very cream used for breastfeeding. I smiled. "Chloe didn't buy the lanolin oil for her breasts," I whispered.
"She
"Bought it to lubricate the hinges." I grabbed the left edge of the heavy frame and pulled. With a soft, heavy whoosh of air, the entire mirror swung outward, revealing a dark, narrow, hidden compartment built directly into the plumbing chase. Inside the darkness, a man was crouching. He was tall, wearing a silk undershirt and a pair of dark trousers. On his feet were the size 10 Ferragamo loafers. His face was pale, sweat dripping from his forehead, and a jagged scar on his left temple was flushed red with panic. "Sean Sterling," Detective Miller said, her gun instantly trained on his chest. "Get on the ground."
now."
The arrest of Sean and Chloe Sterling was the lead story on the local news the following morning. The tragic widow of 7th Avenue was exposed as a mastermind of a multi-million-dollar insurance fraud scheme. Her husband, captured alive in a hidden compartment behind her vanity mirror. But the real drama was unfolding inside our building. By 9 a.m., the hallway of the 7th floor was filled with cardboard boxes. I stood by our doorway, sipping my morning espresso, watching the quiet, humiliated exit of Brad from apartment 501. His face was covered in purple bruises, the unmistakable handiwork of Tiffany's heavy-handed slaps from the night before. He was carrying a single duffel bag, his eyes fixed firmly on the carpet as he walked toward the elevator. Tiffany stood at her doorway 2 floors down, her voice echoing up the elevator shaft as she screamed at him. "And don't you dare think about calling the kids. You can explain to the judge why you spent our savings on a fraudster's shoes." Marcus from apartment 302 wasn't faring any better. His wife's parents had arrived with a moving truck at dawn. They were currently systematically clearing out his apartment while Marcus sat on the curb outside, his head in his hands, completely abandoned by his family and his neighbors. The righteous men of the building had been completely silenced. The Snapchat group was deleted, replaced by a quiet collective dread as the IRS and the insurance company began auditing anyone who had donated or transferred money to Chloe over the past year. The elevator doors dinged, and Manager Carter stepped out, carrying a large manila envelope. He walked over to me, his posture stooped, looking 10 years older than he had the night before. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I wanted to personally deliver this to you." He handed me the envelope. I opened it and pulled out a document. It was an official, unconditional apology from the HOA board, along with a rent waiver for the next 12 months. The board, "We are deeply embarrassed by how we treated you and your husband," Carter said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We let ourselves be manipulated by a very professional con artist. We hope this goes some way toward making things right." "Thank you, Manager Carter," I said, slipping the document back into the envelope. "We appreciate the gesture. And I assume Chloe's lease has been terminated? The bank is foreclosing on the unit as part of the asset forfeiture." Carter nodded quickly. "She won't be coming back. Ever." "Good." I smiled, taking another sip of my coffee. It's always nice when the building manager finally takes out the trash. Carter nodded nervously, offered a hasty bow, and practically scurried back to the elevator. I turned back into our apartment, closing the door behind me. The apartment was quiet, filled with the warm, comforting scent of fresh cinnamon rolls baking in the oven. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen island, reading the morning paper on his tablet. As I walked in, he looked up, a soft, genuine smile spreading across his face. He set a fresh glass of warm water on the counter for me. "Handled?" he asked, his voice warm. "Completely," I said, sitting down beside him and leaning my head against his shoulder. "The ducks are clean, the trash is gone, and the building is finally quiet." Ethan laughed, kissing the top of my head. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, Mrs. Vance." "You don't have to worry, Mr. Vance," I whispered, closing my eyes and breathing in the scent of our clean, peaceful home. "You wear size 9. You're exactly where you belong."